Hi everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and I'm here to do a review of the Sacred Earth Oracle by Tony Carmine Salerno and Leela J. Williams, with the artwork by Helena Nelson Reed. Now, I've actually had this deck for a couple months now, so this is less of a first impressions and more of a review after using the deck. I will say as a preface that I really was not expecting to love this deck because I'm not sure why. You know, there were quite a few decks that came out in a fairly short time that were sort of earthy based, shamanic based, or shamanic titled decks. There were several of these types of decks that came out in a kind of bundle, right? So there was, say, the shamanic healing cards, the mystical shaman, this deck. I don't know. There were a few decks that were coming out in a group, and I have quite a few of them because these were decks that really excited me for my own spiritual practice. And so these decks purported to reflect a lot of the way that I see the world. And I'll put a link below. I have a video on decks that there's a groupings of decks that have kind of come together that really reflect the way that I personally see the world. And so I had most of those, and I didn't have this one, and so I thought, you know, I'm going to go ahead and pick that up so that and I think Earth Warriors, that's another one. Anyways, they all were kind of coming out around the same time. And so I thought, I'm going to go ahead and pick this up because I had the other ones, and I want to, and I'm going to do a video sort of all of those decks and why I like certain ones over the others, and or how they fit maybe in different slots. So that was my intention, was to pick this up, so I kind of had the range of the decks that were kind of came out that were new and sort of based on the same theme, and kind of do a compare and contrast of those decks. But I have to say, this was the last one that I purchased because it was the one that when I realized that Tony Carmine Salerno wasn't the artist behind the deck, which when I knew this was coming out, I assumed obviously that this was his artwork because his name is on it, and he has other decks that are his artwork. And I'd seen a few of the images, which were beautiful, but to be honest, I just kind of assumed that it was going to be maybe more beauty than substance. And that was just my, that was my just personal thoughts, right? Without looking into it much. Just when I compared it to the other decks, I don't know, I wasn't sure about this, but I picked it up because it was the last one that I needed to get. And so I have to say that this has proven me wrong. This is one of those reasons why sometimes it's not until you work with a deck that you know how or is going to work or not work for you. And this deck has been amazingly supportive for me in the time that I need it. Again, sometimes it's because of the timing. It's the timing when you get something, it offers something that you're looking for. There's a lot of reasons why Oracle or Tarot decks work or don't work for individuals. And so obviously my channel is one that is focused on tutorials of reading of all sorts of divination forms and deck reviews. That's what I started this channel about. But even the best that I can do and the most thorough that I can do at reviewing or showing a deck, there will always come down to sometimes just having, if something feels like it's giving it a try, because just because I love it doesn't mean you're gonna love it, and just because I don't love it doesn't mean you won't love it, and all of the variations that can come in between. I know I'm rambling. I don't know why I'm quite so rambling at the get-go of this. My point is this one did surprise me. It was not one that I expected to love as much as I did, even though the artwork looked amazing. And I want to say before I forget, because I want to make sure to point this out, that while the artwork is amazing in here, and it is so beautiful, I really feel after using this for a couple months that the power for this deck for me is in the keywords. So there are just something a little bit different about some of these keywords that it doesn't feel like we've seen them over and over again, and that makes it a really strong experience. I really do feel like a lot of it is the concept. The artwork is gorgeous, but the concept and the structure of the deck and the titles and keywords for the deck is what I think really stands us out from other decks. So this is a Blue Angel deck. It's a 45 card deck and guidebook, as they usually do. It of course comes in an amazing Blue Angel box. I mean, Blue Angel has certainly set the bar for a lot of Oracle decks. I think that we have an expectation when we get a Blue Angel deck, and you know, generally that pays off. Has a beautiful dark green on the inside. It's just, you know, it's typical Blue Angel, you know, beautiful deck. Not color, you know, I would love to see color images here because this is such a color rich deck. I would love to see color in the guidebook, but you know, I'd rather obviously the work go into other things. But you know, it's just typical. If you have a Blue Angel deck, none of this will surprise you. Again, this white paper came on the top originally. So I have already edged the deck because, again, I've been using this. So typically this does not come with a green edge. This will come with white edges, but I have greened them, and I really like the way that they turned out. I actually like the backing. I think I've heard a couple people haven't felt like the back really meshed with the front, which I can see that that could be the case, but I quite like this, and I like this almost like mini little grid right here in the middle. And I don't know, I actually do like the backing. I don't think that it is perfectly indicative of the kind of tone of the rest of the deck, but it's not so glaring, such as say like the Ghost and Spirits Tarot, which is so gorgeous and then has almost like a cartoon backing that just doesn't mesh at all. I don't feel like this is so much of a dissonance, so I actually quite like the backing. It is glossy. I do wish, you know, with the beautiful Mystical Shaman, the beautiful Shamanic Healing cards, a lot of some of these have just this gorgeous matte, beautiful matte cardstock. And again, that's preference. Some people love the glossy because it causes the colors to really burst. Really, it causes the colors to be just beautifully saturated. But I think we've seen in some of the recent decks that you can actually get a beautiful matte finish and still have a very vibrant deck. So personal preference only. It's typical Blue Angel. It's great cardstock. I'm just not a fan of the glare, and it's mostly because of the way that my lights are set up, so that when I'm doing readings, I get probably more glare than some people do. So I do want to point that out, that I probably have a bit of a more problem with glare than maybe the average person does. And there are many people who love glossy cardstock. So personal preference. So that's the deck. Again, if you have a Blue Angel deck, none of this is a surprise. It is standard Blue Angel. So let's put that aside, and let's put this aside for a minute, and let's take a look at the guidebook. Now, if you followed my channel long enough, you probably know that with especially Oracle decks, I don't tend to immediately go to guidebooks. I do like to give them a read through when I first get them, just to get a feel for things. So it's not that I never read them, but for me, a really great Oracle deck has enough in the imagery and the keywords is evocative enough to kind of let me go where I'm going to go. And I generally find that to be the case. There will be times when something will be like, I wonder how this might tie in, and I might go in and look, but I don't use Oracle deck guidebooks really any guidebooks a whole lot. There are certain ones that break that mold, but for the most part, so take that with a grain of salt. I do like that the cards are alphabetized, easy to find. I know that's a weird thing to point out, but there are decks of late that seem very strange in that they're not numbered, nor are they in alphabetical order, and I have to go hunt for them. I don't think that's helpful, because as the way that I use Oracle cards, if I'm going for the guidebook, it's usually because something has piqued my interest and I want to go immediately. I'm in the midst of a reading and I want to go to that card. I don't want to hunt. I don't think it's good practice for deck producers. So I appreciate that. Very clear, very easy to find table of contents. You can see I've got some highlighting in here. So this is an introduction. This deck is designed to broaden your sense of being through the frequencies of our sacred earth and her expressions in nature. This idea of the frequencies is something that comes up in kind of aligning our frequencies with the world around us in a beautiful way. The Sacred Earth Oracle evolved from an inspired concept of Tony Carmine Salerno. The spiritual meanings and poetry throughout the guidebook are very much the foundations of the project was built on. So I always like this as well when they give this explanation, right? Because this tells me that there wasn't just a bunch of pretty images and they then kind of pulled them together and tried to come up with concepts for the images, and that gets to be sometimes less cohesive. This had a set of meanings and a set of ideas for each of the cards that were in place before the images were brought in, and that oftentimes makes a much more workable, usable deck, in my personal opinion. So then Tony invited Leela Williams, who we have here, to bring his vision further into form, and she worked with the original manuscript and drew on the wisdom from the natural world to pen the insights and earthly meaning. So if we just take a card here, we have the earthly meanings, and we have insights, and then we have the spiritual meanings. So we have three types. So Tony Carmine Salerno came up with sort of key ideas, what the cards were that he was wanting to create, as well as poetry that you can find throughout, which I do appreciate and enjoy, that we have here. And then he gave the concept to Leela Williams, who then fleshed it out with the earthly meanings and the insights. It was then the artwork. So I like how they've really gone through and explained the process. I enjoy things like that, because then sometimes I can say, oh, okay, well, I see why this might be a bit of an issue. I'm going to look more to the artwork that was chosen first, or vice versa. It helps, because once all of the concepts were there, they then went to Helena Nelson Reed's artwork was chosen to portray the messages. So the artwork was not, from what I can tell, would not have been created for the deck, but the deck as a whole was created, and then the artwork was found to reflect that. Obviously the number one best way for a deck to come into fruition is to create the concept, create the deck, and then paint or create in some way the artwork to go directly with those meanings. That's, to me, obviously the most cohesive deck that you can achieve. But I really do like that, because I feel like many Oracle decks actually start from just the images, and then we put some keywords that might go with it, and so we have lots of random keywords. So if pre-existing artwork is going to be used, I much prefer that there is a deck concept that then that artwork is pulled into, because I feel like then you have a more cohesive deck. again, my personal preference here. So then the manuscript was then polished to ensure a cohesive flow between the text and the imagery, so they understood this as an issue. And so the oracle that you hold in your hands now is a synergy of creative input, which is quite perfect for a deck that reminds us of the connection between all things. Fantastic. This little thing right here for me was really helpful in explaining how the deck came into creation, and it makes a lot of sense after using the deck. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out, because a lot of times in these types of decks we do have those what, you know, where is this coming from? Did you find a bunch of pretty pictures and slap some words on it? Because there are decks that happens, and you can feel it when you use it. You can just tell that there isn't that synergy there isn't this cohesive whole. So I appreciate that. There are a couple card layouts. I actually quite like this layout here of the Earth Turns layout. I've used that a few times. I love this idea. You're not an observer, but a participant, and the person with the most impact on your life is you. Now, it does talk about how there are things that you can't impact, but you do have the most impact, and it builds into this reading in a great way. We have some poetry by Toni Carmine Salerno, and then it goes into the card meanings. So we have a black and white thumbnail of the card. We have the title or key theme of the card. We have an earthly meaning, a spiritual meaning, and then the insights are more often than not sort of this. I don't want to say scientific, because I don't think that they're all necessarily scientific things, but it does speak about these things in their physical form. So it speaks of diamonds that might have something to do with it, or it talks about the cycles of the earth and the travel of the sun and the planets around us. It talks about the color spectrum of the color red, or particles and the way that they move, or the formation of the earth and asteroids, or salt and the way that this is a physically an important element, sunlight and the way that sunlight falls over things. So more of that science end of things. Again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a geologist. I did want to be one when I was a child. That was one of my primary things I wanted to be. But I'm not an expert. So I'm not going to say that all of these things are, 100% perfect scientifically, but I appreciate that there is that. This is a deck that is focused on our sacred earth. And so I appreciate that there is that aspect. It has that feel of Devas of creation, where you have that intersection between spirituality and physicality or science. The DNA strand with the spirit inside of each thing. And the way that these things exist, they're not separate, right? We don't have spirit over here and DNA over here. They are intertwined. And so the sacredness of earth is not separate from the physicality of earth. It's all part and parcel of it, in, again, my opinion. So I appreciate that aspect of this guidebook. So we'll definitely read one of these. I guess we'll go ahead and read the first one so you can get a feel for the guidebook. I've had to put these back in order, so I'm not promising that they may have some slip-ups in the order of things, because, it happens. Okay, so here we have absence. The earthly meaning, and again, the earthly meaning and insights were written by Leela J. Williams. The poetry and spiritual meanings are by Toni Carmine Salerno. And again, the beautiful artwork is by Helena Nelson Reed. So the earthly meaning here is absence makes the soul grow stronger. The absence of agenda, stress, or the desire to wear a mask is required so you can be fully present once more. However, it is not what is present, but what is missing that needs attention. Rather than fighting what you don't want, put your energy into what you do want, but first rest. Constant illumination brings burnout. The spiritual meaning is meditation connects you with your inner world, where time melts into eternity and love is always present. Journey in meditation through the endless dimensions of self. Gaze into the dark mirror of eternity and see the infinite light of your soul. Relax and go within each day, even if it is only for a few minutes. Dark, quiet, inward journeys can be as illuminating as bright outward ones. I really like this because as I think I've said in a few videos and even probably more in the live chats, a lot of people talk about the presence of light and the healing of light and this of light and meditating on the bright light of healing and go to the light, this kind of thing. I really work with and really resonate with and feel healing through the absence of light, through darkness and shadow in a beautifully warm, comforting shadow way. So I do like this idea that absence of light doesn't always indicate something that is negative. So then the insight portion, which is more the science portion, the sun, stars, volcanoes, fireflies, jellyfish, there are many sources of light, but there is no source of darkness. In a time outside of time, before creation, before birth, before light, there must have been darkness. Nothing makes darkness. No energy is required to sustain it. Darkness cannot be boxed up and taken away. Darkness is nothing in and of itself, and yet it is potentially everywhere. Darkness is the absence of light, the absence of creation. Darkness is inevitable and it is necessary. Without darkness, plants cannot survive. They need the night so they can breathe and process food properly. We all need the darkness. In the absence of light, we create spaces of rest, healing, and intimacy. It is impossible to fight the dark. Do not wrestle with it, embrace it. You knew it in the womb as a place of safety, formation, and growth. When you are ready, rested, and healed, you can emerge and be present in the light once more. I think that's beautiful, and I quite love it. So, imagery wise, we do have somebody with their eyes closed. We do have the sense of darkness. I would have perhaps preferred even more darkness to be involved in this, but we see the power and the so much beauty really in this image, so much color and motion and tree roots and things, right? But her eyes are closed. She's not seeing that. She is inward. Her journey has gone inward. So it's beautiful. I like the moon here in the night sky. So it's there. It's a beautiful image. And I can certainly work with that as just going within and closing your eyes off, even to the beauty that is around, to go inward. So that is an example of what the guidebook gives you in terms of a reading. So let's go through these cards. Whoops. Let me close my phone off. Here we have alchemy, and I'm not going to go through, I guess, each. Obviously, I love this concept of alchemy, the concept of bringing two things together. And in this one, they talk a lot about the way that rocks are formed. But this is that idea of throwing things into a smelting pot. This is the idea of taking things and pulling them together to create something new. It has a very magician feel to it. It also has a little bit of the Temperance card, which can be called the Alchemist, with the fire and the water here, and the combination of these two things making new things. So again, I think that it helps obviously to understand what alchemy means, but we do of course have the guidebook if to get a hint from there. Beautiful imagery. It's like you can see the bones. Here we have Alliance. I feel like I've seen this image before, so I'm sure her work must be out and about in other ways. I don't think in another deck. I don't think I have any decks that she's created, but I feel like I've seen this image before. But this is about alliance, making the most of our connections. We see this woman who is literally part of a connection with animals and owls and plants and butterflies, and she's literally at one with these places. And so having those allies and building up these connections and really being connected to the world and to those around us being an important part of things. This reminds me, I don't have the Wild Kuan Yin Oracle, but the look of this reminds me of that style. I don't think that she was the artist for that, but it does remind me of that. But of course we have the balance. Again, I do like the fire and the water. We can see the moon here. We can see the sun here. This is not a yin and a yang symbol, but you get that feeling of that energy here of this things being in balance, and them holding hands the way they are in just that perfect way keeps them in balance. So I quite like the imagery here for the keyword. Here we have brilliance. Again, I love the almost like the sun is coming up over here. Is all part and parcel of her hair. Very watercolory feel here, but you can see that brilliance just kind of rising up and coming up to shine. That I think is beautiful. It's like the dawn of a new day. It's something that is being birthed. It's that idea of light being birthed in every morning. So I think that is gorgeous. Here we have center. I do love the lotus here. This idea of coming into center. We see the moon. I mean, there's a lot going on. These images are not in any way, shape, or form minimalistic or simple. They are very complex. Lots of things morphing and kind of melding into each other, but they're really gorgeous. A lot of themes of light and dark here, which I think is gorgeous. And again, that sense of, despite all of that kind of chaos in a way, even though it's beautiful chaos, this idea of kind of coming in and centering, that we need that centering even in the midst of beautiful and wonderful things. We can still need to come to center. This is stunning. Just image-wise, I mean, just take everything. Oh, I think I have it wrong. Yeah, no clarity. This, just to me, yeah, take everything, any meaning away, take the title away. I love the image of this card. We do have that, you know, almost like a geode here, and that clarity of the crystals that are within is really beautiful. And having this moment of seeing clearly is kind of what this is about. Whereas this one, find it, is more of that moment of creation and that moment of creative spark, that moment of brilliance, that like the aha moment. This is more clear seeing clearly in the middle of maybe a tangle or in a dark forest, and you all of a sudden have this clear sight through that I think is gorgeous. Here we have connection. Now, we had an allies card, which was about having connections with the people around us. But this seems to be a little bit different. Let's see. Find yourself by losing yourself in the conversation, a story, or someone's eyes. Be vulnerable. This is more of an individual connection, right? So with the alliance, it's more about what is your networking? What is your community group? What are the people that are around you and the vibrations around you that are connecting you to this bigger web? Whereas the alliance card is, the connection card seems to be more of that, having that moment of seeing the divine in someone else, have that moment of one-on-one connection to something or someone. Consistency. This is about habits. We've got the sun, we've got the moon, we've got this idea of migration of birds here, and this understanding of consistent patterns and habits that can be good and sometimes can be difficult. But it's definitely this idea of the understanding of the consistent cycles and changes and patterns that we can see in the world around us. context. That's an interesting word, right? You don't see, or I don't think you see words like context in oracle decks. And I love this because it does, I mean, for me, again, not looking at the guidebook, but it just has that understanding of taking things in context. I can't say exactly that I know what this image has to do with context. Interpreting one piece of the puzzle in isolation leads to error, right? Avoid reading too much into something. Taking in the fuller picture will take the time and effort, but it will be in perspective. A flyaway comment or something. Yeah, so it has idea what we think of as context. I can't say image-wise that this image speaks to me as of context. It's just a beautiful image, but I love this keyword because I don't think you often get a reminder that says, wait a minute, are you seeing this situation, whatever you're reading for, are you taking it in with context with the greater world? So I think that's really powerful. This is gorgeous. You know, this sense of core, like I think, while this is a beautiful image that I don't necessarily see as being anything much about the card, which is okay. I'm a text-based person, so as long as the keyword works for me and it's a pretty image, I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay with an oracle being very based on the titles and the keywords, where some people really do need that visual connection. This one, I think, and most of the ones, this is the first one I will say that so far that I don't see that connection, but this core one, I mean, you can just see this beautiful understanding of coming into the core of self. Now again, and I'm trying to, because I've used this deck quite a bit, especially for myself, there is the center card, right? Centering is different than going into the, can I find it now? No. So there are things that I think people might say, oh, but these are similar concepts, but I don't find that it reads that way. I feel like this is more of the act of centering for me when it's come up. Take a breath, center. I come from a Buddhist perspective. I come from a meditation perspective. So this idea of coming to center, and especially with this lotus here that really draws me there, is very different than getting down to the core of something. It can be similar, but I feel like in readings, this is very different. This is a very different different energy, that core of the volcano. And I think imagery wise, this really reflects that. And I think it's beautiful. Dependability. I love this coming together here. We've got two energies that are coming together to take care of themselves probably, as well as what they are nurturing that is here. So I think that's really beautiful. That dependability is more important than grandiose promises. It talks about that focus on the focus inward on the things that are important, where you can be dependable and you can actually carry it out, versus things that are out there that aren't so significant. Maybe bigger and grander, but not as significant. So I think it's beautiful. Discernment. This is a little bit different art style than some of the cards. I think that one, as well as this one, kind of stand out as a little bit different. You know, we can tell this is coming from a body of work, but it's beautiful. And she's really down there in the grass. Again, I feel like this does represent the card. She's in the grass. She is face to face with these flowers and these plants. And so she's really paying attention and focusing in and discerning the smallest things, discerning the bees, discerning the way that the petals are formed. Like, this is being very focused and discerning very clearly even the minute things. So I think it works well for the name. Efficiency here. This is interesting because this is a card that is about moving in a way that is efficient, not struggling against things, which I think in more of the terms of flow, just because of the strong connection I have to moving with the flow from Taoist thought that really influenced me at the very beginning of my spiritual path. But this idea of efficiency of movement, right? Efficiency of energy, I think is really a powerful one. Making minor adjustments. We don't have to make massive changes to have change occur. That we can make these little shifts and adjustments and in an efficient manner that are going to start to shift the way that the energy is. Again, I think very interesting keywords and concepts in an oracle deck. Again, image-wise, I don't know. I don't know that I can necessarily say that this has anything to do with that, other that we have this small flame here in her fingertips. It's not a raging inferno. It's not even like getting to this volcanic core, which we see here is very big and bold, fiery energy, whereas this is small. This is a minute energy, but it's enough to make big changes. So I'm gonna say, yeah, I think I had to look a little closer, but I can certainly see it there. This is a beautiful image. Of course, it's on the image of the box and the guidebook, and it's really stunning. Buffaloes have been interesting because of a different deck. The buffaloes running in the Mystical Shaman have come up for me a lot, and so I've really been when I see that, I'm like, oh, look, there's a buffalo. It's a stunning card. And the idea and the concept of expectations are so important. I mean, I need to do a whole video just on expectations, because I truly believe that at the heart of many disconnections, many painful situations, all kinds of things, the word expectation is at the heart of all of it. Understanding what you are expecting can really open up why you are reacting to a certain situation, because it's usually the not getting what you're expecting to or expected to get out of something that causes a lot of heartbreak. It's not so much to do with the other person or the actual situation, but that you've placed expectations that were not met. That's not the fault of the person or this particular situation. You just came in with these expectations. And I think that it's a huge word to have in an oracle deck. I think it's very powerful. Now, image-wise, this is so stunning. This is talking a lot about I'm trying to see where it is talking about the horizon giving away to tiptoeing sunrises, surprising sunsets, and imposing mountain ranges. These are all things that we can see here. So this person in some ways is looking out and has this whole vista, this whole landscape in front of them. This rising dawn day that's coming, these mountains to be explored. What are your expectations? The scale of the mountains are very different when you're at a different position from where you see it. It talks about this idea that the sunset may be followed by an even higher mountain. There may be vast difficulties within the mountain. When you look out over things, what are your expectations coloring in that may not actually be there? You may see, oh, this is the beginning of a new life in those mountains. There is going to be this oasis that I'm going to find and live happily ever after. And it may actually be really difficult in those mountains, and there may be another mountain to climb before you get where you're going, right? So it's that whole idea of, it's good to look out into this kind of vista and have our dreams and our goals, but how much of what we see are we really seeing, and how much are we expecting? So I think it's a bit of a pull, right, to get this image here, but I can see it, and it's so beautiful, and the word itself is so much enough for me that I don't really mind it. Let's be honest. There are some things that it breaks it when you don't have that connect, and sometimes they're just good enough, even with they're not perfect, that I love it anyways. It is why, I mean, there's no question that for me, you can tell the difference between a deck that the artwork is created for that deck versus pre-existing art. But this one is, kind of steps outside of that barrier, I think, because the concepts were built first. And there are some cases where it's like, okay, it's okay, because the concept of the card for me is strong enough to outweigh if there's a disconnect with the image. And the images are so beautiful that I'm okay with it, if that makes sense. Here we have formation. This is really beautiful. If you get looking in here, we have lots of sort of insects and moths and leaves in a beautiful, beautiful way. But we have all of this stuff going on in an internal level. We have things growing. We have fluttering of moths and wings and things within here, which I think is beautiful because it does talk about letting things have a moment to form, letting things having a chance to settle down and fully come into existence before taking any action. So if a butterfly or a moth is in the moment of transformation, or if the flower is in that moment of blooming, let it come fully into form before, or an idea or a thought or a situation. It may not be the time to act before it's had a chance to fully come into being. I think that's really beautiful. Again, I just really love the keywords here. This is a stunning image again. Fortitude. This looks to be very strong. We have this strong stag energy, wolf energy, mountain lion energy, this strong connection to these animal energies. This looks like fortitude to me. This to me works really well. This idea of having strong foundations and strong connections that are going to get you through whatever you need to get through. It's a beautiful image too. Fragments. Now this is really interesting. I do actually think this looks fragmented in a good way. We do see sort of green grasses broken by this blue and this flower here. We have sort of landscapes that look arid or destroyed in some way. We have light and we have dark, and so and we have her hand kind of cutting across her face. We do have that idea of fragmentation here that I think does work. And there's so much you can do with the word fragments. Is this fragmented memories, fragmented life, where your life has been shattered, and somehow, even though some of the bits are beautiful and some of the bits are destroyed, you know, the key here is bringing, how do we start to pull this together into a whole? This has definitely come up for me in beautiful ways. Friction. Again, I do think the face here looks to be a little bit, there is that idea of friction. That is a little bit of a reactionary face here. This idea of that things can rub us the wrong way. It doesn't always have anything to do even with exactly what those things are, but that there can be resistance to friction, resistance to things that are abrasive. And I do think the face here does reflect that. It's just beautiful. Heat is gorgeous. This is sort of heating things up, starting to agitate the vibration, right, in a way that is going to cause change. Of course, it's hard with these beautiful wings here to not think of a phoenix, which is really gorgeous, but it is this understanding of heating things up and how it does start to cause. It talks about here, excites the atoms and creates change. Everything that we think about, you know, with the suit of fire. And certainly visually this works gorgeously, in a gorgeous way. This is beautiful. The influence of the cycle of the moons, the influence of this person giving nurturing to this animal, this idea. I will say this, the spiritual meaning, while really beautiful, I don't always see exactly, okay, so let's just read this. So this is influence. Only through the eyes of the soul can the true nature of your life, existence, and purpose be known. All of life flows from one divine heart of creation. You have a purpose, a meaning, and a role to play in this great journey. It may be beyond the knowing of the physical world, but it is not beyond the knowing of your soul. So this is all talking about knowing the purpose of your soul. That, to me, doesn't really have a lot to do with the concept of influence. But it does go on in other places to talk about how the way that we think, the way that we see things does influence the way that we see them. I don't particularly find this guidebook meaning to speak very much to what I personally, again, because this is my personal reaction to the word influence. And yet I find this to be extremely powerful card to use, because it's understanding the influences that are around us, some for good and some for not so good, right? But the idea of how a small word or a small act can have such a great influence. We know that the moon has this powerful influence over water, over ourselves, if you go that way. So I find this card to be really powerful, and one that I love to have come up. I don't particularly find the guidebook to be reflective of how I personally see that. That's not meaning that this is wrong, but it means there's a little bit of a discordance between the word, the image, and then the guidebook there. But again, because I don't go straight to the guidebook, that doesn't bother me, but it might bother somebody else. I think this is beautiful. I mean, look at this. We have this shell right in the ear. We put our ear up to shells to hear the oceans. And we just have all of this minute color and lines, and it's just stunning. And we just can think about that intense, all that there is to hear when we focus and hear and listen and pay attention. I think the word as well as the image is gorgeous. Magnetism, this idea of things being drawn to each other, opposites being drawn to each other. I do see this like more of a bird energy here, and a little bit more of a watery energy here. I don't know that that's the actual image, but there is to me that idea of water and air, but they're being drawn together. But there is that idea of forces that are pulled together, which I think is beautiful. And you do get a little bit of a yin-yang feel to it as well. Moderation. I think this is a beautiful word. We don't talk about this a lot. We talk about, going for broke and finding your dreams and pursuing them, full force, and these kind of getting rid of things, cutting things out of your life that aren't serving you, and, these kind of big, bold strokes. But that sometimes moderation is called for. Sometimes we just have to be a little imbalanced until you can really suss things out. I don't necessarily see the word moderation in this image. I'm just trying to be open here because I do think there are some, again, flaws to using pre-existing artwork that will show up. It's just the way it is, and so I'm not going to say that that's not the case. But I love this idea of moderation. Now, this deck, I think, in the guidebook is talking a little bit more about letting go of moderation. And I think that actually moderation, sometimes we need a little bit of that. Depends on how this shows up. I also like it in terms of moderating, right? So we can almost see where these two birds are like, and we have this sort of third force coming in and moderating and said, okay, everybody take a time out and take a breath, right? You can go, so in that sense, I do see this particular word working. But again, it's a word that I don't think we often see in decks, and I like that. This is a gorgeous image, and it's that beautiful image of motion and movement and flow and allowing things to flow. This idea of shifting something and the shifts that it causes and all around us is absolutely beautiful. This insight here and here really to me speaks to this idea of things being in motion, coastlines, continents, mountains even, that our planet itself moving, right? This constant motion. But then you have this spiritual meaning here. You have the power to free yourself from the lingering sense of guilt and fear that is holding you back. You can choose to let go, or you can hold on. This card encourages you to release the blocks in your otherwise divine plan and be free. Remove the debris of doubt and be moved to hope as love and clarity flow within you. So you can kind of see it, but I feel like I really like the insight more. This idea of things are always in motion, we're always in flux, and to use that to our advantage. It's okay that we have to. There is a time for things, and there's a time for things to be let go of. So it works, but you know, I don't know. It's just it's something that I tend to have issue with sometimes with Oracle decks. So I'm pointing that out. But this is beautiful, and the word and the image are beautiful together. Patterns, I think any of these images could have been used for patterns because they are all her artwork is highly patterned. So this, you know, you can see all kinds of patterns that are melding into here. Again, I don't think this specific image, I think any of her images would have been beautiful, but I love the keyword and this understanding of patterns. Now, again, I think some people might say that there was one, I can't remember. There's another one that might be similar, but I can't find it. And I find this to be different. Heat, moving things up, fragments. It's the one where you see the, at the top. Where did it go? Sometimes, I mean, I just set things down. How can they go? I guess the idea of the influence of things. But that, I think you can take quite differently. Even those cycles and patterns, or even the migration one. But I feel like this is different, and I really love how this works. Perception. Again, I guess one that I would say would be somewhat close to that. That people might say, oh, is this the same energy being repeated because they wanted to use an image? This idea of discernment. Are discernment and perception similar? Sure. But there is a difference. Discernment has a little bit more of that idea of being able to distinguish between things, right? It's sort of more of that feeling of distinguishing something, the differences, whereas perception is more identifying and figuring out what's going around. There is a difference, and so I like both of these cards. Perception, again, I'm not going to say this image is 100% says anything to me about perception, other than that I do like the sort of feeling that the third eye maybe is involved and sort of really kind of opening yourself up to the energy around to perceive what's happening around. So I can go there, even though I think it's a bit of a stretch. Here we have perspective, which is, again, wonderful word, get some perspective. I think that there was, and I know this is probably frustrating for some people, but I've actually, you know, I've used this deck for a while now, so I want to give it, I think what people might always ask about these kinds of things is, and there's another one that would be similar to this, but now I can't find it because I really messed everything up. Oh well. I do think gaining perspective is an amazing word that is comes into play very well in readings. This is stunning. The card is stunning. The image is stunning. The potential that resides inside of us, the image and the word together is stunning. It's just a stunning card. I mean, you could use this for all kinds of stuff, and it has come up in amazing ways, and I adore it. Preservation. I mean, how gorgeous is this? Oh my goodness. How gorgeous is this? Peace is surrendering. Love is vulnerable. Allow yourself to trust and believe that love is here for you. You are safe, protected, and loved by the divine. Let love water the seeds of joy, creativity, and contentment that lie within you. Accept this blessing. You have this, but I love this because to me, this is this understanding that life and death are all part and parcel. And certainly if we look at the outer world, which this is a deck that is connecting us to the sacred earth, there is the understanding, right, that death feeds the living. If you eat animals, the death of that animal is feeding you as a living human being. If you eat plants, the death of that plant is feeding you as you to sustain you. decay goes into the earth and puts in nutrients to the earth so more things can grow. So there is this beautiful understanding of how these things work together, and I think this image is amazing. Productivity, you do definitely get the sense of abundance and things having grown, and this idea of putting efforts into things and it growing into almost overabundance there. But I think, you know, it's not hard to get there with that. Reaction, I mean, this is beautiful. We're seeing a sad reaction here, but we do see that we do it's okay to react to things. It's okay to cry. It's okay to have difficult emotions, and being present in those moments. And I do like the lotus being here. This does remind me a lot of like Pema Chodron's work that I did a lot of work with. That it's okay. Having a reaction. There's nothing wrong with reacting to things. Getting stuck in that reaction is problematic, but feeling the things, leaning into the feelings is fine, as long as you're continuing forward. So I think this is really beautiful. Ready but waiting is beautiful. She is a sense of calmness in a deck that is very, very active, and almost like this card, almost to an overabundant way. There is a peacefulness. There is a serenity here. There is an intake of breath and waiting for that moment to release this dove. And I think that really works. Rediscovery, seeing the world through the eyes of a child. Again, this is just my own reaction to them. I have no clue what the guidebook says here, but this works really beautiful with this face of a child and this keyword. It's wonderful. It has very Six of Cups energy. Renewal is really beautiful. I almost like we're moving from winter into spring here, so that really speaks to me. The image itself speaks to me of renewal. Repetition. Now, this is certainly we're seeing the moon again, and so let me see if I can find the ones that I'm speaking of here. But this is very different, so I'm just gonna pull it out. And then the other one I think had lots of birds migrating. I'm gonna see if I can find it. But of course I cannot, because that would be too here. Consistency and repetition. This, we have the moon cycles, but this is speaking more of the influence of these things. So I don't think at all that that's the same energy. But this idea of consistency and repetition, to me, are two different things. The consistency of a pattern is one thing. Now, yes, you could say, well, any consistent pattern is a repetition. Could these be quite similar energies? I suppose so, but this is more this idea that things can repeat and that we might actually need to break the cycle. We have more of a removal of a mask. We have more of a sense of consistency in a positive sense, the way that cycles can be very positive, and then we have this idea of repetition and maybe needing to cut through. I like this V shape here that is cutting through, because there is a little bit of that sense that perhaps there are cycles and patterns that do need to be cut through. And so that to me is how, in terms of readings, these two things might come up separately and in a different way. Revision. This is a beautiful image, and I love the word revision, which this is talking about really studying the past and really kind of understanding the way that we sometimes have revisionist memories, right? That we sometimes revise in our mind the way things have happened. So that is quite interesting, right? That we also have the memory of being of our full potential within us, but that we have over time, this image has been revised by the way that people feel about us, about the way that we have learned from people, from institutions, from media. It has revised some of our internal knowledge of self. So there's a lot of things I feel like you can do with this that's quite powerful. revolution. This is interesting because again, we are in a spiritual context. We're getting that sense of like invisible wheels, the seasons of life move through an eternal cycle of death and rebirth. We've kind of had that already. And so I would say, let's look at the inside. The burnt tones of leaves, short snowy days, bright bursts of color, seasons come and go. Yeah, I mean, this to me is probably a little bit the most that would to me be similar. So now we have consistency, repetition, and revolution, right? But this is more the way that things revolve. I would have to sit with this one a little bit longer to say, okay, well, what's the difference? If this is repetition that might need to be broken, and this is the consistency of the changes of seasons and the way things move, these to me would be quite similar energies. And so of all of them so far, this is the most where I say, I'm not sure that we needed revolution on top of the consistency and the repetition. So I'd have to sit with that. I think that truthfully you could probably have one or the other and you wouldn't necessarily need both, but I haven't had it be a problem. And I could see though where if these came up together that I would still be able to work with this, because this is that consistency of patterns, and this might indicate that it's time for a revolution. It's time for the things to change, for that movement around the sun to occur. There is a time for things to start to shift now. So I feel like I could still read with these even if they both came up in the same reading. But I will say that this energy is a little bit, the first one that I would say is actually probably a little bit repetitive, which isn't bad because we're almost done with the deck. Here we have a shift, which again could kind of take the place of this revolution card. Like I feel like this may be a card that could be dropped from the deck if you wanted to. I don't know that it's necessary, but I'm just saying this indicates that there is a shift that's occurring, which I think is so important. This is a keyword I think is to pay attention to the shifts, right? That can be good or bad, but paying attention, there is a shift about to occur or in the midst of occurring. And so that's really important, an important card here. Space is beautiful because we have all of this beauty here in the middle, and it's almost like sometimes you need the space for things to stretch out and to move. Give yourself a little bit of a step back and some space. I quite like that. This is beautiful. This is a specialization. I have that real strong, I kind of ditched the guidebook. Sorry, folks. Sorry, folks. Because I haven't really used this deck a lot with it, and I've used this deck a lot. I love this specialization. This is that idea of intense work on something, specializing. And she looks like she is doing all of this. Her hands are in a very, almost like she's holding this wand. We have almost geometric forms going on here, and there is a sense that she is intently working on and building up a specialization in what she's doing. I quite like that card. Stretch is interesting, I guess, with space, because in some ways I kind of feel that they're the same, but this is sort of an unfurling of what is there, whereas I really feel like this is, I've gotten both of these cards, and I feel like this one is more of stretching, you're actually growing, whereas this is unfurling from being constrained. This is that sense of actually growing out these roots, and you're stretching beyond your current form. So I do think these are a little bit similar, but they read to me really well having both of them. This surface is beautiful. This floating, this kind of, it's okay to sink down and then rise to the surface. This has been a very powerful card as well. Time, again, could time in some ways be a part of cycles and repetitions? Yes. But time is very different. That's a very different construct, right? Cycles and things of that nature that happen that occur in nature are there. Time is more of a construct of man, right? And I believe that we actually, many things exist, are outside of time. I believe that time is a restriction that in some ways human beings have placed on themselves. There is cycles. There are cycles there to notice. I can see why the construct of time was put in place, but I think that this is a different concept than the others that we've seen. And then we have almost like a world card, this idea of unity when everything comes together. We have the earth here, we have the sun here, we have the stars here. It would be nice to see a moon here as well. But it's a very much like a tarot world card when everything sort of comes together and is working in unity. That's a very powerful, powerful energy. So there you have it. I know that was quite a long walkthrough for a oracle deck, which generally go quicker for me than the tarot decks because obviously there's only 45 cards here versus 78 cards, but I just wanted to give this justice because I think some of the things that without looking at this deck, some of the things I would have thought would have been problematic, don't actually end up being problematic in this deck for me personally. I do think there are some issues, as I've already pointed those things out, because there is pre-existing artwork. So I don't think it always works, but it's so beautiful that it rarely matters. And as a whole, I feel like if you're willing to just kind of roll with these concepts that the keywords speak of, I think you might find this to be a very different experience in a deck. And I really love it. It's been the one I've used the most for myself in a very trying month or so, where I've been trying to work through my own personal things, and I feel like this is the deck I keep reaching for. So take that as you will. Now, I pretty much primarily use 3-card drawings with this. I will show you the reading that's in here. But in Oracle decks in general, I tend to use them at most with 3 cards. So we have this idea of preservation and understanding, light and dark work together there. This idea of brilliance, right? These difficult energies, these retracting energies, the energies of death here that are feeding and preserving life give way into this brilliance, this creative brilliance that comes. And then from that, I love this idea because then we have this kind of cycles of time. One of the things you'll notice is that a lot of times, not always, but a lot of time, let me zoom in here a little bit closer. This is something I quite like about this deck. Even though the colors are very different, there are often ways where the cards sort of meld. So this sky here kind of melds into this, and see how you're getting into these browner tones that kind of meld into this. It's just one of those things where you almost feel patterns that connect all of the cards together when you do a reading that is really beautiful to see. Now again, I didn't have any obviously question here, but this is I just want to show you, lay a couple 3 cards down so you can kind of see how this goes. So I guess we'll keep zoomed in, and it doesn't always, obviously here you don't see it as much. But then that kind of can step out, right? This can make this really stand out in this really bold colors. This really draws your eye into the sense of renewal that's here, because it's only on renewing yourself that you can dependably nurture something else. And be very careful of the friction that might disrupt that energy there, right? So there's just, I've just found this as a reading deck. To be stunning, it's gorgeous, but it's more than just a pretty face. I've found personally that it's just really read well for me, and it is a pretty face as well. So anyways, I hope that this helps. Oh, I know I was going to lay out. Let me zoom back out. Where's the book? So this is called the Earth Turns layout, and I don't even know if this is going to be able to show. We'll see what we can do. So this can be used for contemplation, guidance, or divination, it says. Shuffle the cards as you ask your question. But I like the way this is set up, right? Because it has this idea of ideals. What are your ideals? At the top, I don't think this is going to fit, but we're going to try this, right? We have what is at the foundations of things, a need to listen. We have a past, a present, and a future card, which I love having those sort of linear feels here. But then what's interesting is that there's another card that is placed here that is what's in darkness, what's in shadow, what is a possible future that you might not be seeing. It's kind of what's unseen but might be coming. It talks about in the guidebook how 1, 2, and 3, so what's the ideals and the foundations and the past, these are kind of set in stone. You can't change the past really. What's at the core of things is there already. What it is that you want for things are already in place, but you can change your now, right? You can change the potential future and what is unseen future. These things are changeable. So it kind of highlights what are fixed and what are changeable, which I think is really beautiful. So I do love, and I think it really works with the concept of the deck. There are some things in the natural world, in the when we tap into Earth, that are fixed and unchangeable, at least on a short-term level. And then there are other things that are much more mutable and shiftable. And so understanding when things can be changed and when they can't is an important concept. So I think I love having decks in which there are reading spreads that actually do reflect the kind of the deck. They go with the theme of the deck. I really love that. So I hope that this has been helpful to you. I know that it's like, oh, you love it so much, I have to get it, I'm gonna love it. You might not. You know, again, as I said, sometimes it's the case of timing. This deck came at a time in which it just worked well for what I needed it to do. That does happen. And everybody is different in how they're going to react to a deck. So hopefully I've shown you some of the powers of this deck, some of the flaws of the deck, and that's enough to be able to help you try to make a decision about whether this is a deck that you would want to work with or not. Again, even if we never purchase a deck, I think that seeing this can make us think about concepts that can still be helpful. So have a wonderful day.